Hey, good morning. I'm Dan Conjorski, host of Bible-ethics.com. And I want to talk to you today from Genesis 34. I'm going to read just a few verses here and then begin speaking about it. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." Genesis 34 recounts the tragic story of Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, who is violated by Shechem, a Hivite prince. Shechem then expresses his desire to marry her. Jacob's sons, especially Simeon and Levi, deceitfully agree to intermarriage on the condition that the men of Shechem be circumcised. While the men are recovering, Simeon and Levi slaughter them in vengeance, and the other sons plunder the city. It's a horrendous story in Genesis 34. And it really covers a complex moral failure on multiple sides. You got sexual violence, you got deceit, revenge, and misuse of a sacred covenant. So Shechem's act against Dinah, it was a profound moral and social evil. Okay, it was evil. He raped her, and then he proclaims his love for her. This whole event underscores God's concern for the vulnerable in our society. Even back then, and even today, the vulnerable in our society, particularly women who were often powerless in the ancient culture. Not so much today in today's culture, but in the ancient culture, women were often powerless. There's a moral lesson here. The violation of bodily autonomy are condemned. Every person deserves dignity. They deserve protection and justice. Okay? The lesson learned here, the ethical lesson, is that we must speak out against oppression and assault as Christians. Okay? Silence or passivity in the face of injustice is not acceptable. What Shechem did to Dinah wasn't acceptable. Okay? I don't care if he said he loved her, he should not have raped her. He violated her, he should not have gone against her wishes. We often see that even in today's society. So we got this theme here, justice versus vengeance. Justice versus vengeance. So what is the best answer to this? Simeon and Levi's desire for justice is understandable. They wanted justice for their sister. But their method was excessive and deceptive. Okay? Their response crossed the line from justice into unrestrained vengeance or revenge. And they not only punished the offender, but they also destroyed an entire innocent population. So God calls us to pursue righteous justice, not personal revenge. Justice must be proportional. It must be truthful and without deceit. And what we see in this story in Genesis 34 was full of deceit. It wasn't truthful at all. Simeon and Levi had a plan to not only violate the Shechem, the Hivite prince, but also to wreak havoc on the city or on the people. They also misuse a sacred covenant to achieve their personal end. And it's a very sad story. Jacob's sons and Simeon and Levi, they use circumcision, which is a holy covenant act, as a tool of deception. And this shows the corruption that happens when sacred things are used for manipulation or violence. Did you hear me? What I said? It says this shows the corruption that happens when sacred things are used for manipulation or violence. We know, one of the ethical takeaways is that we must not use religious practices or God's name to justify unethical behavior. And we often see that across the board. We must not use religious practices or God's name to justify unethical behavior. Sacred truth must never be weaponized. So Jacob, initially, when he's told, if you read through the chapter, and I encourage you to do that, when he's told, he remains silent when when Dinah is violated. At the end, he's more concerned about his public reputation than the moral outrage. His passivity leads to conflict and destruction. So, I can remember some things where people where they were passive. They would not make a report because of if it was a false report, it would lead to a lawsuit. So we cannot be passive about anything that is anything to deal with the violation of another person's autonomy, personhood. One of the ethical takeaways here is that leadership requires moral courage. Moral courage, failure to take a stand in times of injustice creates space for greater wrongdoing. So this, and then see, not only did this guy rape Dinah, but he also wanted to marry her. He had confessed a love for her, which the whole thing is, if he really loved her, he wouldn't have raped her. It could have been more lust than love. But the idea of intermarriage with the Shechemites may have provided political or economic advantages, but it risked Israel's covenant identity as well. So Shechem really professed this intermarriage, which may have been to their advantage. So their willingness to negotiate away covenant values led to moral confusion. So Israel's willingness to negotiate away the covenant values led to moral confusion. So one of the takeaways here is that God's people must uphold moral integrity rather than seek cultural acceptance at the cost of righteousness. So we should not break away from our values, and especially our biblical values, and accept cultural values rather than let me rephrase that. We shouldn't give up our biblical values for the sake of culture. That's my point. So a couple of things here that we need to keep mindful of is that human dignity is sacred. Okay? Christians, we are called to protect the vulnerable and advocate for justice. Anger must be controlled. Even justified anger can lead to sin if not submitted to God's righteousness. Religious hypocrisy is dangerous. Using faith to manipulate or harm destroys the credibility and dishonors God. In leadership and accountability, families, churches, communities need leaders who act with courage and justice. God's grace is beyond human failure. Despite the failures of this chapter, God's covenant purposes still move forward, showing His sovereignty even in human sin. So the questions we might want to ask ourselves, and you might want to reflect on, was there a righteous way for Jacob's family to respond to Dinah's violation? And what's the difference between justice and revenge? Where is the line crossed? And how can religious acts be misused today, just as circumcision was misused in this story? I think if we use any form of manipulation from the pulpit or in our leadership in the church, I think we're misusing our faith and our relationship with God. What does this chapter reveal about God's concern for the oppressed and His intolerance of human exploitation? So these questions need to be answered. They need to be answered by us individually and collectively. So in conclusion, Genesis 34 is not a story of heroes. It's not. There's no heroes in this story. All right. It's a warning. It reveals the dangers of unchecked desire by Shechem. It reveals the dangers of passive leadership by Jacob. It reveals the danger of vengeful violence by Simeon and Levi. It also reminds us that God continues his covenant promise despite human sin, pointing forward to the need for a perfect, righteous judge fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And I hope as you read this chapter and reflect on these questions and reflect on what I had to say this morning, that you're able to take away something that makes you live more biblically and ethically with Bible ethics. Next week, we will talk about the New Testament connection to Genesis 34. We'll talk about how what Jesus said and what does the New Testament say about the act or the kinds of acts that we see in Genesis 34. So my name's Dan Conjorski. I am a minister in the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. And I'm happy that you are here with me on Bible-ethics.com. If you like us, please press like and subscribe to us. We really need your subscription, and share with others what I shared today. And next week, we'll talk about the New Testament response to Genesis 34. Thank you.